man named Leonard and his colleagues invade a cabin in the middle of nowhere, claiming to be there to stop an apocalypse. The residents of the cabin are shocked to hear this, as they can't seem to understand how they're connected. While they're still confused, Leonard then reveals that to save humanity from annihilation, one of them must die. A few hours earlier, a young girl named Wen is busy catching grasshoppers when Leonard approaches the cabin where she and her family are staying for their vacation. Wen looks scared because of how big the man is, but as Leonard gets close, he asks if he can talk to her. Still scared, Wen says she doesn't speak to strangers, but Leonard says he won't be a stranger for long because he wants to be her friend. Wen looks confused, but Leonard tells her he's not a bad person. As he sees the jar she's keeping her grasshoppers, he says he also loved catching grasshoppers as a kid. He then asks how Wen learnt it, and she says her uncle Eric taught her. As they keep talking, Leonard looks nervous and stares into the woods. Wen finally asks what he's there for, and even though this question makes him feel uncomfortable, he says he's there to make friends with the little girl and her family. Leonard then spots a scar on her lip. And after he asks how she got it, Wen says she broke her lip when she was little. Leonard feels sorry for this and says that even though he doesn't have a visible scar, he's sure that if she looks inside his heart, she'll see that it's broken because of what he'll have to do later that day. Leonard then looks into the woods again, and Wen suddenly sees 3 other individuals heading for the cabin. This scares Wen, and she asks if they're Leonard's friends. Leonard doesn't answer this question. Instead, he says Wen is his friend. He adds that regardless of whatever happens later in the day, she has to remember that they're friends. Wen starts to get really scared, and Leonard then says that the 3 individuals coming are the people he works with. He also says they have to do what is the most important job in the world, and that Wen and her family will have to make a big decision. She immediately abandons Leonard and hurriedly walks toward the door. However, before she enters the cabin, Leonard tells Wen that she has to convince her family to open the door for him and his crew when they knock. He also adds that if they don't open the door, he and his colleagues will have to break in. Wen gets really scared, so she runs inside to warn her family about Leonard and his colleagues, Redmond, Sabrina, and Adrian. Eric and Andrew are surprised to hear Wen's concerns, but as they check through the windows, they see the armed group and start deciding what to do next. Just then, Leonard knocks on the door, but Eric and Andrew refuse to open it. As they're also trying to call the police, Adrian mentions that they won't even be able to do so because they've cut the phone line. Since they still refuse to open the door, Leonard and the others resort to breaking in. But Eric, Andrew, and Wen quickly block the doors and windows. Despite this, the cabin is still invaded, and as Eric and Andrew are about to escape, they see Sabrina behind them. Seeing as she's holding a weapon, Eric tells Andrew to take Wen to the car while he attacks Sabrina. Unfortunately, Sabrina knocks down Eric before he hurts her, and he loses consciousness in the process. Andrew gets pissed by this and immediately attacks Sabrina, even though she says she can help Eric because she's a nurse. Before Sabrina gets hurt, Redmond defends her, but Andrew eventually manages to beat him up. As Andrew then turns to look for Wen, he sees that he's already surrounded by the others, with Leonard carrying his daughter. This renders him powerless, and he surrenders while Sabrina takes a look at Eric. Shortly after, Eric wakes up and sees that he's tied to a chair, with Andrew also next to him. Leonard then asks if Eric is now better, but Sabrina says he's still heavily concussed. Meanwhile, Andrew runs out of patience and starts accusing them of being part of a hate group that hates homophobic couples. Leonard and the others deny this, but Andrew remains confused as to why his family is being held hostage. Just then, Leonard calls the others to the living room to start what they came for. Andrew looks really scared, but Leonard says they're not there to hurt anyone. As they all assemble in the living room,
"My name is Sabrina."
Sabrina stands in front and introduces herself as a registered nurse who used all her savings to find the cabin. Leonard speaks next and says he's a teacher who also runs an after-school program. Next, Redmond introduces himself and says he works for a gas company. He adds that he has also spent time in prison for bad things he did in the past. Following this, Adrian introduces herself as a line cook at a Mexican restaurant. As she keeps talking, Leonard suddenly turns off the TV and says it's time to tell the family what they came for. Just then,
Ultimately, whether the world ends or not.
Leonard announces that he and the others are at the cabin to prevent an apocalypse. He adds that only Eric, Andrew, and Wen can stop what's coming because one of them has to die. Eric doesn't believe this, and he says Leonard might be suffering from some sort of mental breakdown. However, he says he's not, and that the family will have to decide who to sacrifice. Leonard also mentions that if they fail to sacrifice someone, the world will end, and the three of them will be the only ones left alive. Finally, he adds that he and his colleagues won't force them into making a decision. Andrew thinks it's a lie, but Leonard mentions that he and the others got visions that led them to the cabin and showed them how the world would be destroyed by earthquakes, tsunamis, and other plagues. Eric and Andrew don't believe this because the visions could mean anything, but Leonard warns them that a plague will be released into the world every time they refuse to sacrifice someone. Eric looks confused, but Andrew accuses them of being religious fanatics who don't know what they're saying. Leonard doesn't respond to this, but he asks if they're ready to nominate who will die. Andrew and Eric give a negative response, so Leonard and the others pick up their weapons, with Redmond standing in front of them as they face the couple. Eric and Andrew immediately beg for their lives, saying they've done nothing wrong, but no one says anything. Adrian then goes to place Wen on Andrew's lap so that she won't see what's about to happen. Just then, Redmond looks incredibly nervous as he says he's scared. As Eric and Andrew continue to beg him not to hurt them, Redmond kneels and uses a white cloth to cover his head, while Redmond then cries. Eric suddenly sees a bright light in the mirror and looks confused as to what he just saw. Before he thinks too much about it, Redmond mentions that a part of humanity has been judged. Almost immediately, Sabrina and Adrian strike Redmond's head with their weapons, after which Leonard finishes the job, leaving Eric, Andrew, and Wen terrified. Leonard and the others are also devastated, but they immediately shake it off and take Redmond's dead body outside. When they return inside, Leonard turns on the TV and changes the channel to a news station where they watch a report on a series of earthquakes and tsunamis already happening around the world. As a live video of a tsunami is shown on TV, Leonard and the others are shocked because it's the exact same thing they saw in their visions. Andrew still doesn't believe it's real, but Leonard mentions that they unleashed a plague when Redmond died. While Andrew keeps complaining, Eric starts to wonder if Leonard and the others are telling the truth. Just then, Leonard says that if they don't choose someone to sacrifice by morning, another plague will be released. Shortly after, Sabrina continues treating Eric's injured head in the bathroom. While she's at it, she talks about how she started getting the visions and how she met the others at the boardwalk leading to the cabin, just like she saw in her visions. As she tries to convince him that they're on the same side, Eric says he's on his family's side. Following this, he is taken back to the living room, and there, Andrew asks if he's feeling better. Eric says he is, and Andrew then tells him not to believe what they saw on the TV, because according to the news, it was from 4 hours ago. He also mentions that Leonard seems to have timed everything well because he has been checking his watch too often. Meanwhile, Wen sneakily gets to the basement and finds her way out of the house. Leonard quickly realizes this, so he runs outside to find her. Even though she tries to hide behind a tree, he eventually finds her and takes her inside, saying no one can leave. After Andrew confesses that it was his idea to let Wen escape, he suddenly remembers that he knows Redmond. Eric is shocked to hear this, but Andrew says Redmond was the guy who attacked him at a bar many years ago. He adds that Redmond's real name is O'Bannon, and he spent some time in jail for what he did. Leonard doesn't believe this, but Adrian says they can't know for sure because they met Redmond for the first time at the boardwalk.
Because it doesn't matter what his name is.
Eric also remembers what happened and how O'Bannon insulted them for being a homophobic couple. This eventually made Andrew insult O'Bannon, who later broke a bottle on his head. Following this, Andrew suggests that he and his family were targeted, but Adrian says that Redmond also got visions and was even the first person to talk about the cabin on their message board. As he hears that they had a message board, Andrew continues to accuse them of being part of a hate group. He also tells them to check Redmond's pocket for his ID so he can prove his real name. However, Leonard says it doesn't matter. He also tells them to try to sleep because they'll have to choose a volunteer to save the world in the morning. The next day, Adrian makes a nice meal for Wen, And while she's eating, Andrew secretly tells Eric that his rope is now slightly loose. He also adds that if he can free himself, he'll run to their car to get his gun in the trunk. Meanwhile, Wen finishes up with her food, but she steals a knife and secretly hands it to Eric, who tells her to create a distraction when he gives a signal. Just before he can use the knife, Leonard tells him and Andrew to make a decision on who dies. Andrew then accuses him of being a bad person who only wants them to kill each other for nothing. However, Leonard takes out a picture of the kids he coaches at the school he works at. He then mentions that they're the reason he's trying to prevent the apocalypse. Shortly after, Adrienne stands in front of Eric and Andrew while she cries and tells them to make the right decision. She then mentions that she has a child named Charlie, who she doesn't want to die, but Andrew doesn't believe her. Eric also begs her not to lay down her life because he doesn't think killing herself is related to the plagues. Adrienne doesn't listen to him, and as Sabrina and Leonard prepare to kill her,
You don't have to do this.
Eric tries to cut himself loose, while Andrew also struggles to free himself to stop her. However, before they can get it done, Adrienne gets killed. After her dead body is taken outside, Sabrina turns on the TV to see if anything has happened. As the news channel comes on, they all watch a report on a deadly virus already killing people. However, Eric and Andrew see that it's a pre-recorded program. Andrew immediately calls it out, saying they've just played a recorded video. However, Eric suddenly tells Andrew that he saw something earlier. Leonard and Sabrina hear this, so they ask about it. Eric then mentions the bright light he saw before Redmond got killed. Andrew thinks it's probably connected to the concussion he had, but Eric says he doesn't believe Leonard anyway. Just then, he gives Wen a signal, and as she starts screaming, Eric cuts the rope, but before he can move further, Leonard and Sabrina stop him. Since they're not focused on him, Andrew then frees himself and sneaks out. As he reaches the car, Sabrina shows up and tells him not to leave, but he doesn't listen. She then hurts his leg, and even though Andrew is in pain, he throws sand into her eyes and enters the car so he can get his gun from the trunk. Sabrina still tries to stop him, but when he eventually gets his gun and threatens to kill her, she runs away. He then returns inside and threatens to kill Leonard if he doesn't drop his weapon and let his family escape. Instead of doing that, Leonard asks if they're ready to make a choice. Andrew gets pissed and says they're not making any choice, but as Sabrina then charges at him from nowhere, he shoots her. While looking shocked as he realizes what he has done, Leonard doesn't seem to care as he finishes off Sabrina and takes her body out, saying another plague has been unleashed. Shortly after, Andrew goes outside to check Redmond's dead body to confirm that he's actually O'Bannon. Luckily, the ID on the dead body confirms this, and Andrew confronts Leonard about being delusional and leading the others to attack the innocent family at the cabin. Leonard denies doing anything like that, but Andrew still doubts him. Just then, Andrew forces Leonard into a bathroom while asking for the key to the truck he and his group came in because they already punctured his car tires. As he refuses to give up the key, Andrew locks him up. But before he moves away, he hears the sound of a broken window. Despite being scared, he opens the door to confirm if Leonard has escaped. Even though the window is truly broken, it turns out that Leonard is hiding behind the curtain, and he attacks Andrew, after which he takes the gun. He then says that he won't let them leave the house. He also tells them to turn on the TV to confirm that another plague has been released to the world due to Sabrina's death. While Andrew says he won't do that, Eric turns it on and sees that the world is still in danger of total destruction, with several explosions reported on the news. Leonard also stands in front of the TV and says the exact words the newscaster is reading about the recent explosions. As he keeps talking, Andrew breaks the TV and says that Leonard has probably seen the news before. Meanwhile, since it's clear that Leonard knew what the newscaster said through his visions, Eric now believes him. Andrew looks shocked and tells him that it's all a lie. However, Eric says it's unlikely that everything happening on the news is a coincidence. Following this, Leonard tells them to follow him outside. Eric then instructs Wen to hide in the nearby treehouse while he and Andrew stay with Leonard, who sits on a chair and narrates how scary the visions were. He also says it's not too late for Eric and Andrew to make a decision. He then asks if they'll do it, but as he gets no answer, he cuts himself and bleeds to death. This seems to trigger a dark cloud to appear in the area, but Andrew still wants them to leave. However, Eric says they can't leave because he believes the sacrifice truly needs to be made. He then mentions the bright light he saw and says he knew he felt something. Andrew tries to change his mind, but Eric says the sacrifice might be something other families have been doing in the past. He adds that it might just be their turn. Even though Andrew now believes an apocalypse is coming, he still doesn't want either of them to die. However, Eric says he's ready to do it for when. He also begs Andrew to shoot him while he's thinking of his daughter enjoying life in the future. Andrew doesn't want to do this, but Eric forces him. After he then takes the shot, Eric dies. And Andrew looks devastated as he goes to pick up Wen inside the treehouse. As she sees that he's alone, Wen asks if Eric already made the sacrifice, and Andrew confirms this. Together, they then head out and watch the cabin burn after Andrew set it on fire. Since he now has Leonard's keys, Andrew leads Wen through the woods to find his truck. When they eventually find it, Andrew drives to a restaurant where they see many people watching the news to confirm if they're now safe from the chaos happening around the world. From the news, Andrew also sees that the chaos has stopped, and as he hears many survivors talking about how they're relieved to be with their families again, he realizes that Eric did the right thing. Shortly after, he then returns to the truck with Wen. As they take their seats, Andrew checks the bags inside the truck and finds some evidence confirming that Leonard and the others were not lying about who they were. Following this, he and Wen then put on their seatbelts, after which he drives away.